The world's political top brass converge on New York. But does the General Assembly of the United Nations really have any power to tackle the globe's most pressing problems? This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm Sami Zaidan. The United Nations annual gathering of the great and the good has just begun in New York. But is it really the Parliament of the world, or just a toothless talking shop? World leaders will spend a fortnight holding talks on the issues close to their hearts. High on the agenda this year, climate change, Darfur, Iran, Iraq and the rest of the Middle East. It's also the first year in charge for new UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon. But apart from attracting thousands of column inches, what good does the General Assembly actually do? Well, the General Assembly, established in 1946, is one of the 5 main arms of the United Nations. It meets for its main session in September each year. Each of the UN's 192 member states is entitled to send delegates. Members vote on crucial issues of peace and security, as well as financial and organizational matters. But apart from budgetary issues, resolutions aren't binding for member countries. Well, joining us to discuss the future of the General Assembly are our guests in New York, James Paul, Executive Director of the Global Policy Forum and a well-known speaker and writer on the UN and global policy issues. And in Amman, Jordan, Hassan Nafaa, Professor of Political Science at Cairo University and Secretary-General of the Arab Thought Forum that's based in Amman. Thank you both for being with us. If I could start with Mr. James Paul. What is the point of the UN General Assembly meetings when everyone knows their decisions are not binding?
Well, the UN General Assembly meetings, particularly this one right now, is a chance for various heads of state and government to come together and to have discussions not only in the open sessions but also very important private discussions and diplomatic negotiations that go on during this period. It's important to remember that in the week when the presidents and heads of state and government are gathering here is not really the crucial work of the UN General Assembly, but rather a kind of big public gathering. And the real work of the Assembly goes on for many months. In fact, the General Assembly is really in session pretty much all year long.
Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Paul, but some would argue that discussions is about all the General Assembly ever does. I want to read here a part of Resolution 313, in which this resolution was supposed to strengthen the role of the General Assembly. And what did they decide? A, to convene and organize major thematic debates. B, discuss issues pertaining to international peace. C, consider annual reports. D, hold interactive debates. More talk, more debates, more discussions. Aren't they supposed to do something more than that?
Well, we have to remember that this world is a real mess, that there's huge inequalities, that there's war going on all over, and people have a lot of hope and expectation of the UN. But the UN is itself a creature of member states, and those include great powers that have their own special interests and don't want to see the UN actually succeed in solving these problems. So while our national parliaments are not very often not able to wrestle with and solve the problems within nation states, where they actually have police forces and all kinds of mechanisms and governments that are able to work on a sovereign basis within the national territory. The UN General Assembly, on the other hand, does not have these powers, as you say. And so the expectations of the world are huge, and the power potential is quite limited, and we have to see the change in that over the next coming years if we're to really solve the most serious problems facing humanity.
All right, well that's a really interesting point. Let's go to Hassan Nafaa. I think we're kind of hitting the nail on the head now, aren't we? The basic question that we're getting to is the General Assembly, and some would even say is the United Nations as a whole, is it supposed to be a democratic institution or an institution that reflects the real power balance of the world? What do you think?
No, it is not a democratic institution at all. It has never been a democratic institution, and it is getting less and less democratic. Even the democratic countries that are represented especially in the Security Council, they behave as dictators, as a matter of fact, and they want to lead the whole world according to their order. They don't want a real democracy within the United Nations. The Security Council itself is not a real representative body. The General Assembly is more representative because it includes all the states of the world. But unfortunately, the General Assembly has no power. It could issue resolutions, non-binding resolution, but it could not take decisions. The only organ that can take decisions is the Security Council, and you have the problem of the veto, and you have the problem of the representation. You don't have a fair representation. You have the whole African continent, for example, doesn't have a permanent seat. Also, South America doesn't have any seats. It is not represented in the Security Council. So it is not a democratic institution. The General Assembly has been designed to be a forum of discussion. But it was relatively easy to have a serious discussion when you had 51 members of the United Nations. That was the original states. But now you have 192 states in the General Assembly, and you have 162 items to debate in the General Assembly. Imagine 192 delegations debating 162 items. This is a real mess, and you cannot have a real serious discussion. So you have
we don't even need to
mess.
imagine a lot, Professor Hassan, because we often see endless debates in the UN and including in the General Assembly.
That's correct.
Let's talk a little bit about then what is the solution to that. Should the General Assembly be given more power, or should the Security Council be widened and veto powers there reconfigured?
As a matter of fact, we have to reform the whole United Nations organization to introduce a system of checks and balances. If you want to have a real democratic political system, or to transform the United Nations into a truly democratic system, you have to have a mechanism of checks and balances to transform the General Assembly in a true legislative body, to transform the Security Council in a true executive branch, but in the same time you have to have a political control from within the General Assembly over the Security Council, and you have to have a legal control by the International Court of Justice also, to make sure that the Security Council will not take the decisions that are against the Charter of the United Nations.
All right.
So I do believe that you have to reform the whole international organization to make this kind of checks and balances and to distribute powers among the 5 branches of the United Nations.
All right, that's an interesting point. It's also a very common demand, but James Paul, often demands for distributing powers and reform have gone nowhere. At the end of the day, is it really likely that, let's say, a country like Micronesia will get equal power with a country like the United States? No world power is going to back that.
That's true, but there are various ways that the General Assembly and the Security Council could be organized in a way that did reflect and represent the distribution of population within the world. But these kinds of democratization are absolutely opposed by the great powers, and first and foremost, as the professor said correctly, by the democratic powers that practice a certain democracy within their borders. But when it comes to international relations, they practice nothing less than despotism. And it's this despotic approach to the world, which includes, as we know, invasions of other countries. It includes very, very heavy-handed activities within the UN itself, as we observe day in and day out. So these are the problems. Even if you had a UN that was more democratically structured, there would still be the problem of some level of enforcement within the international system. And this too is a big problem, where great powers don't want to see enforcement at the UN. What I think is interesting, though, to move just a second away from formal reform, and that is that the UN, in spite of all its problems, is the center of such tremendous legitimacy. And all these heads of state are coming here to New York this week, and they come to other major UN functions. And why does the President of the United States feel that he has to get the agreement of the UN Security Council in order to invade Iraq? He didn't succeed, but the United States and the UK certainly tried very hard.
So that's
this
a
is
fair
the kind
point.
of paradox.
It counts for something. Well, it is now time for a short break. When we come back, we'll discuss the reform efforts of the UN and what they have achieved so far. Stay with us.